kill my hair. Bad.
Greetings, my fellow primates, everybody watching, whether you be theist, atheist, religious, or secular. My name is Shane the Skeptic, and it looks like today I'm having another one of the good discussions to add to my discussion series. Today with me I have Professor Laurence Gonzaga. How are you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing, sir?
Not bad at all. So I just wanted to begin our discussion. I know the stream is going to be about free will, determinism, and psychology, but I did want to begin by talking about psychology because obviously between the two of us, you know, you being a psychology professor, me being a guy that watched free crash course videos about psychology, I think you probably know a little bit more about the subject than I do. It's probably a fair guess.
A little bit, perhaps.
A little bit of a fair guess. So, yeah, what are some of the I guess basics? What are some of the first things for somebody who was studying psychology? What are some of the first things that you learn about in it?
So if you're just interested, like let's say when I went to college, I was majoring in psychology, but if you follow the your requirements to get through, even if that wasn't your major, usually there's like a section where it's like humanities or like social sciences, so you get to choose between like sociology 1 or sociology 100, depending on how the numerical stuff is structured in your college, or psychology or I don't know, human science or human development, something like that. So if you do choose Intro to Psych, Intro to Psych is a good one to take if you're somewhat interested in psychology, because, well, it's a two-edged sword, because on the one hand you get a sort of a the spectrum view, I guess, of all the things psychology can touch on. Like in my class, when I teach Intro Psych, there's 16 chapters, and those 16 chapters are like 16 different areas of psychology that you can actually specialize in: industrial organizational psychology, social psychology, cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, I don't know, behavioral psychology, all sorts of, biological psychology. So why I say it's a double-edged sword is because that's a lot of material. Like you're
right.
I always tell my students, I say it's pretty brave of you to take at least my class, because we're going to cover all 16 chapters. Not every iota of it for sure, but it's in itself really a whole class. So you can take a whole semester of cognitive or social psychology or developmental psychology, and I teach those classes too. So I'm a little less stressed in those classes because I can stretch out that week for 16, 17 weeks.
Okay.
And so those are just different areas. The things that I think my students are most interested in, probably the most practical stuff, are like attachment theory out of developmental psychology, because attachment theory kind of helps us understand why we're insecure, the degree to which we're insecure, or the degree to which we are secure because of our childhood attachments to our parents. And
I've heard a little bit about this.
Yeah. Okay, you can ask a question if you want.
So what exactly, like, what would be a good brief definition of attachment theory?
Okay, just without mentioning too many names, you could just Google it. Anybody who's interested, it's basically the idea that you form a quality of attachment with your primary caregiver. It doesn't have to be your mom. It doesn't have to be your biological dad. It could be a grandparent. It could be whoever you latched onto. Like, let's say your parents were so busy working that it was grandma So really your attachment is formed around your grandma who watched you most of the day, most of the evening, something like that. And when people say that they're secure, or really more commonly we say, oh, that person seems insecure, we're talking about an individual who probably developed a certain learning or behavioral pattern because of that quality of that relationship with that primary caregiver. So if that person, like let's say for example, is hot and cold, let's say sometimes that primary caregiver is very warm. They'll make cookies for you. They'll wait for you at the door when you come home or whatever. They'll give you hugs. But then there are other times, and it's usually depending on what's going on in their own lives, they're distant. They're aloof. They're, and so the child learns like I don't know if this person is safe or not. So then the child develops certain behaviors where they're hot and cold with that primary caregiver, and lo and behold, if there's no intervention up until they're adults, they're gonna develop romantic relationships that are like that. They're gonna have hot and cold kind of relationships where they like to be close, but then when they get too close, they get scared and then they back off. So then you have that kind of a dynamic that happens, and you're like wondering, where did this come from? What's going on with this person that I'm dating? It's likely to do with that early childhood dynamic. And that's just one of there's four. Initially, there were three. So of course, there's the secure attachment, and then there's the insecure attachment, which is subdivided into three different kinds of insecure attachments. So you could have anxious, ambivalent, and disorganized. Disorganized is one of them. So I don't know if you wanted me to go to detail with the other ones, but it
wasn't what I was planning on talking about originally, but I'm also like interested enough that I kind of do. I do want you to keep going on that if you could for
the next few minutes. I wasn't prepared to give a lecture, but I usually you could your audience can Google attachment styles, and they have these helpful pictures to kind of describe that kind of dynamic. So you'd probably come across some videos called The Strange Situation. So this is how Mary Ainsworth, who's the popularizer, I guess you can say, of this idea, came up with this protocol to study these different kinds of kids. So what they did was they got different kinds of kids, and they had their primary caregiver, usually their mom in those days, would bring the child into a unfamiliar situation, and as you would expect, the child is anxious, like, where are we? Why are you taking me? Just like if you've ever observed the child in a new environment, they're looking around, they're like trying to figure out, what is this place? Is this a safe place? Is this a scary place? Whatever. And usually they check to see how mom is, right? If they're secure with mom, they trust mom's judgment implicitly, right?
Okay.
And so as long as mom seems calm, all right, this place seems legit. So what happens is they start playing. There's toys on the ground, right? And then all of a sudden, there's different kinds of levels. But so first of all, the mom leaves, and the kid, obviously, as you would expect, cries. That's what you would expect, because the kid is attached to mom, assumedly. Whether their child is attached to mom or what, they're going to be upset that mom leaves because now they're alone.
Right.
Mom comes back, consoles, and then a stranger comes in. That's why they call it a strange situation. A stranger comes in, and the kid looks at the stranger and then looks at mom like, who the F is this, right? Who is this person?
Right.
Almost as if to say that. Obviously, they're not cussing. They're
depending on the kid, but yeah.
Depending on the kid. They were talking about a toddler. Hopefully, they're not, not a toddler, but an infant.
Right.
So they're probably crawling around. They can maybe walk. It's around that age.
Yeah.
So they look to mom. Mom seems calm. So then, they start playing with the stranger. Then mom leaves. Kid gets upset, starts crying, as you would expect, right?
Yeah.
The question is, how does a child react when mom comes back? So when mom comes back, the child, open arms, warmth, is consoled and calmed by mom, they say that's a secure attachment.
Okay.
Right? There's other scenarios where you have some kids that don't care that mom came back. Actually, they didn't even cry when she left. They didn't care that she left. They didn't cry. They just kept playing.
Right.
They didn't care when she came back. That is a insecure attachment, avoidant because mom is not a source of security. Mom is not a source of comfort. They don't need them. So you think about the dynamic of the parents who just kind of let their kid, they don't interact. There's no sense of warmth or kind, or they don't get. There might be some kindness, but they don't get anything from the dynamic between them. Does that make sense? And then there's another. Go ahead.
Yeah. No. So is it the case that when there is an insecurity in the childhood of a person, as was being described, that is most likely it is going to most likely be the case that in adulthood they're going to be experiencing insecurity as a result of that?
Probably. More often than not. Now, I don't like being fatalistic. See, when I present this, you can kind of see in the eyes of they're like, I get it. No wonder he's like that. No wonder she's like that. No wonder I'm like that. Right. And so then, usually there's that kind of, I don't know if it's catharsis, but there's a sense of, I get it. I like this is meaningful. This is whatever we're sharing. It gives me an explanation as to why this is what's happening in my life.
Yeah.
But then there is, obviously nothing's fatalistic. You shouldn't be too fatalistic, especially in psychology.
Yeah.
Because it's
like nuanced kind of what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like it's a learned behavior, any learned behavior can be unlearned. Right. So if you catch it early enough, if you recognize it in your teens, perhaps, maybe you take a psychology class in high school and you're like, oh, okay, I need to work on this stuff, right?
Okay.
In common parlance, right, you might talk about daddy issues, something like that. So that's not necessarily related per se, but there's a certain insecurity there that phrase is referring to, that's related to early childhood experiences. So I guess what I'm saying globally is early childhood experiences are really important, and we can't just kind of ignore our kids or treat them like garbage, or ignore just ignore them. Maybe not abuse them.
Yeah. So a lot of what goes on in the childhood of a person kind of makes up and forms the person that they're going to be as an adult.
Oh, absolutely. Most of your beliefs are socialized by your childhood. I mean, even you as I would assume as an agnostic atheist, or even those who are atheists would say, well, I mean, you're a Christian because you were brought up Christian, or you're a Hindu because you're brought up Hindu. Yeah. I mean, that's a proof, or that's an observation of exactly what I'm talking about. You're socialized into your global moral system or worldview or whatever it is, up until the point you have a crisis of faith, or you have a crisis of identity or something, and then you recognize where you would rather want to go, and then you make steps towards that direction.
Right. So you've experienced like the observation that people are psychologically inclined to have the religion that their parents brought them up with, the belief systems that they were brought up with. Did this lead to you like questioning? Have you always been a Catholic, or were you maybe brought up in another denomination and became Catholic later on, or?
Well, I was raised sort of culturally Catholic, so I did the practices and stuff. When I was reunited with my biological parents, because we're immigrants, so my grandparents raised me for the first 5 years, a lot of the Catholic stuff, right, in the Philippines. When I came here, my parents weren't very active and interested in religion. So once I started to live with them full time, we sporadically went to church. Maybe every I don't know, every so often. It wasn't very often, but it wasn't a very strong part of life. Religion was, and so eventually I became an atheist for at least a couple of years, at least practically an atheist, and then zealously atheist for a brief period in my college time. Until I took a philosophy class, my first philosophy class at my university. And I never heard of knew about the proofs for the existence of God using, philosophical arguments like Thomas Aquinas or Anselm or any of the other, like Paley's Watchmaker, any of those arguments. I never
theological, cosmological,
Yeah, all of them. And then they didn't actually cover the Kalam. It wasn't, it wasn't popular at that time, or I don't know, maybe it
Yeah.
was. William
Well,
Lane
there
Craig.
were other cosmological ones like Thomas Aquinas put forward.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I can already hear any Christian viewers that I have. They're already probably typing that quote, like, a little philosophy inclineth a man away from God, but a lot of philosophy brings him right back, or something like that.
Maybe.
I'm
I mean,
sure.
I'm not sure if everybody became a Christian in that class. It was a state university.
Yeah.
So,
No, it just, I don't know if you've
yeah.
heard that saying. There's
Yeah.
kind of idea that if you know a little bit about philosophy, you'll probably be an atheist. But, some theists who are well versed in philosophy, they believe that if you study a lot more philosophy, it'll bring you back to your belief in God. And so,
But the ones that say that are theists, right?
yeah, the ones who say that are theists, of course. Yes.
So the atheists can say the same thing. Study a little bit more
Yep.
philosophy, and then I mean, I don't like those kinds of
points.
I
wasn't saying that I think you would make that point. I was just saying, like, I could already hear the Christians in the audience.
Not that I'm not guilty with that sometimes, but if I'm in a more calm state and reflective, and I realize, look, it's there are people who leave religion and go to atheism. There are people who leave atheism and go to theism. I mean, to ignore that fact, I don't know what the statistics are and what the velocity or the rate at which that's happening. But from my worldview, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the rate is. We could be down to 10 theists in the whole world. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean,
right. It doesn't change the truth.
It doesn't change the assumption that what I'm believing is true.
Right.
Because people come and go. If you look at even the biblical scriptures, he had 5,000 followers and all of them left down at 12. He worked so hard to amass thousands of followers. And then because he taught something that was so tough for the people, he was fine with losing all of them and they're down to 12. So it doesn't, who cares? It's your worldview is your worldview. And you are convinced, hopefully you're sincere, and you're convinced that what you've accepted as true is true. Sincerity is the focus for, my interests, right?
Yeah.
I assume you're a sincere skeptic.
Yeah.
You're not just fighting against truths that, have manifested themselves, but you just ignore them. I hope you don't do that.
Right. No, I definitely try to, I kind of I have this rule where I remind myself every day, or at least I try to. I can't say that I accomplish this, but I try to remind myself every single day that I think every human being believes at least something that isn't true, and I'm a human being, so it follows from that I must believe something that isn't true, and I want to figure out what those beliefs are, to the best of my ability, as much as I can, lose as many of these false beliefs as I can realize I have. And the thing about skepticism is, holding my standard of evidence quite high, it helps me be less likely to arrive at false beliefs. Now, my standard of evidence, or my standard of justification, of course, it shifts with the plausibility of different claims. So, if you tell me that the way someone put it to me recently was like, if you tell me you have a dog, I'm going to believe you. You tell me that dog flies, I immediately go, okay, let me see that dog. You know what I mean? So the standard of evidence, it kind of goes up with that. Sure. So you're right. Sincerity is keen. I think it's important. There are some people in the skeptic community who are, I guess, like you were describing, I guess it's like their heart's in the right place. But I feel like some of the people who are, like, for example, Jesus mythicists, it's like they're not really putting forward what standard of evidence they would accept. They seem to just be like, this Jesus character, he's a part of Christianity. And Christianity is a bunch of nonsense, so Jesus must not be real. And I think that, there should be a more respectable, mature approach to it, and go, okay, maybe I don't believe he was, who he claimed to be per se, but if the majority of historians, the consensus is that this human being named Jesus existed, then if I'm willing to say that the consensus of historians, being that Moses didn't exist, for example, is a good reason to think Moses didn't exist, that same standard should take me to believing that Jesus did exist, because it's met by the same thing, right? Oh. So consistent standards, sincerity, yeah, they're all very important, more so than, I guess, the final belief that a person arrives at. Well, in most cases, I guess it kind of depends. But with that said, I did kind of want to move into the topic of free will and determinism, because my position, I'm what's known as a hard determinist. That is to say, so unlike the God thing, where I call myself a soft atheist or an agnostic atheist, I don't claim to know there isn't a God. I simply say, I don't believe that there is one. I'm not convinced that there is one. There are some specific gods I would say I know don't exist, but that's a separate topic. As to like whether or not there is a God, period, like deistic God, it's just, I don't know. When it comes to the free will thing, though, I kind of lean toward some confidence that there is no free will, as to where I'm not just saying I'm not convinced there is free will. I kind of am going a step further than that and making sort of an assertion that there is no free will. There can't be free will. And one of the main reasons I find this to be the case is because, and I want to see how much we agree and how much we disagree on the point that I'm about to make. But I believe that every choice that we make is determined or at least influenced by our psychology, and everything psychological is biological, and that we don't control our biology. And I feel like if you accept those three premises, what you arrive at is that, we don't control our decisions. So how do you feel about, I guess, what I just said?
This might surprise you and disappoint your audience, but I agree with what you said.
I don't think it'll disappoint them that much. They might appreciate it more than they should, if anything.
They should.
But
when I was an atheist, I'd probably characterize what my position was in the same way you did. My third philosophy class that I had, as she was I think she might have been the chair of the department of philosophy, but that was not my major. Clearly, we were talking about psychology earlier, but she seemed to believe in free will. I mean, she seemed like came off as a sort of hippie back in her heyday. And so, that isn't that all about freedom and doing what you wanted to do and stuff like that. So, implicitly, even without asking her, I mean, I'm pretty confident she totally believed in free will, because I would debate her on that as a devil's advocate, because I was already a Catholic by that point. And so the Catholic Church teaches in the doctrine of free will as a doctrine. And so I was arguing sort of devil's advocate, sort of philosophically. I didn't use scripture or anything like that to say I didn't believe that, or arguing for the position that there was no free will. And so we would extend beyond the class. Like I would go to their office and argue why there's no free will. And she was sort of, seemed stumped. She didn't have an answer to it. With at least the argumentation I was making, I don't think the evidence from psychology was necessarily like popular back then. I know the study was from the 80s that talked about event potentials and reaction times and things like that. Yeah. And so
the Leavitt study, I thought it was Lebet, and I was corrected in a debate I had about free will.
I don't know the names. I mean,
okay.
I'm not one of those. Like I need my notes to remember names and stuff.
No, but totally. Because I'm not sure if the one that I'm talking about was in the 80s. That's why I was questioning it. So maybe we're thinking of a different study. But you're kind of referring to like our findings that the components of decision making can really be encoded in brain activity, right?
Yeah, that's in the modern textbook. So I watched one of your debates, at least the first part of it, your introduction, and you were citing pretty much the same study, if I'm not mistaken, which basically what they found was that a decision was made at the neuronal level, or like brain activity level, or brain level, even before milliseconds. I mean, still before. I mean, however, whatever it was, milliseconds or whatever the time was. It was still before your conscious awareness of having made a decision. Right. And so from the psychological side of it, there seemed to be evidence that decisions are made before you. Because when you talk about free will, we're usually talking about our conscious awareness of our decision, that I chose Fanta instead of Sprite at McDonald's. That's what we talk about, free will. I have the ability to choose between those two. You give me those options, I choose Fanta. If the science is telling us that the brain chose it before I even say, or I'm even aware of
Right.
having made my decision, then how can you argue that you have free will?
Exactly. So like I have coffee and it's good. I like coffee and I crave more. And now the only thing keeping me from having more is that my cup is empty. But that's not my point. The point that I was actually going to make was that it seems that we are actually in agreement that I could not have not taken that sip of coffee. Like I might feel like I could have waited till this was over or whatever, but the reality is like the cause for the decision for me to take that sip of coffee that I just took, you know, my craving for whether it just be more caffeine or the sugar in it or the taste, whatever it was that specifically did it for me. It seems like free will would be the ability to have not made that decision, you know, to have decided to do something else. But are you in agreement with me that like I couldn't have not taken that sip?
So I defined it a little bit differently back then, and I rewrote my thesis last night to prepare a little bit for today. So how I define free will, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. So I think free will is the ability to choose between options that are presented or that are available, but they're equally probable.
Okay.
Such that you are making a spontaneous sort of choice to go with, like, you know, the soda machine, let's say. That's usually my go-to example. There's like what, 8 flavors, I don't know, on a standard soda machine, whatever the flavors are. So those are options, right? So those are, you know, without digging deeper as to how I made my decision, seemingly you look at that and you say, of course you have free will. You have 8 options and you're pushing the button and you're choosing. But then my next question is, why did you choose the Fanta? Well, if your answer is, well, that's my favorite soda, well, then the others are not options. So you didn't choose.
Right. And I don't know if one of the Fantas was strawberry flavor and first you had some weird childhood traumatic experience that involved strawberry Fanta.
Yeah.
Let your imagination run wild as to how that could happen. But then it would be the case that you couldn't have picked strawberry, right?
Right. That would not be an option. But then you might say, well, there's water, there's other things. Well, why? Why would, I mean, again, you ask the question, the why. And then if the answer is, well, whatever the answer is that you can think of, if the other answer is, well, you know what, I've never tried strawberry Fanta, I've been waiting, you know, whatever, and now I have an opportunity. Well, where did that spontaneous impulse come from? You didn't choose that. You didn't say, I have a movement in my soul that wants to. No, it just came up out of nowhere. You didn't have to try that strawberry Fanta at that moment. You could have tried it later on. But it's not something you consciously chose, even like things like your favorite color or the things that you buy, everything that you do. I always challenge my students for extra credit. Give me an example of how of when you actually knew you chose something. Like you can prove that you chose something. And then usually the example, some of them, especially if it's a Saturday morning class, they'll say, well, I chose to come here, didn't I? I said, well, if you didn't come to class today, what grade would you have for today as far as participation? 0. Well, but I could still choose. All right, well.
Right, but you desire to have a good grade, and that desire for you to have a good grade caused you to come to class today because it overrode your desire to sleep in. So you had 2 desires, they were conflicting. And, you know, one of the most common examples I get when I talk to people about free will is like, okay, well, sometimes I go to the gym. I don't feel like it, but I do it. Sometimes I exercise and I don't like it. That's free will. And I'm like, no, it's simply the case that you desire to be in shape, you desire to be healthier, and you desire that more than you desire to, say, not work out. And, you know, as much as it feels like you have complete control over this decision, these desires are actually what make up the decision. So it seems like the way that you're defining free will to make it sort of fit this is, it seems like you're defining free will in a way that's more similar to the way that compatibilists define it. Are you familiar with compatibilism?
Maybe. Can you summarize it for me?
Yeah, compatibilists, for short, they believe that free will and determinism are compatible. So I think that the theistic, particularly the Christian equivalent or version of this, I think would be Calvinism. And that's one of the reasons I kind of feel like when I talk to you, it seems like if you took a Calvinist position, it would be philosophically consistent with your belief in the Christian God, because it totally makes sense. Because anytime I've ever had a discussion with a Calvinist, they seem to agree with me. They're like, well, yeah, God has already, I don't know if they would use the word determined. They might say destined. In that sense, sort of the same thing. They might say that God has already destined, who's going to go to heaven, who's going to go to hell, and why they're going to go to those places. So in other words, the decisions that these people make, there's, Romans, I don't know what chapter it says, something that,
9.
about the 9. Okay, there we go. Romans 9, it says something about the book of heaven, or the book of hell. The names are already written in each or something, right?
Okay. I thought you were going a different direction. There's a passage in Romans 9, whatever verse it is, that says, "Who are you to question God, who has made some vessels for destruction and has made some vessels for glory?" I'm paraphrasing. He's the clay. He's the clay maker, the pot maker. So who are you? Don't question. He has, and that's usually the go-to for Calvinists. But here's the news flash for a lot of former Catholics or current Catholics who might be watching this. The Catholic Church taught predestination long before John Calvin. John Calvin was not the author or
the author
inventor
of predestination in Christianity. Okay.
He took it from Catholicism. The doctrine has been there since the beginning. It's in the Bible. So a lot of Catholics don't know this. It's true. Let me affirm that it's a dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church. And it's a teaching since the time of Augustine, even before that. And like I said, it's in the Bible itself. So since the beginning, that God has chosen a certain elect. You might be familiar with that term, the elect, the chosen, or whatever. There's different terms in the Bible. Right. That elect are the ones that are predestined by God before all time. He decided this is the group that's going to make it to heaven. The difference between Calvinism and Catholicism in terms of that particular doctrine is that Calvin says God has chosen, this is the elect, this is the reprobate, that God positively chose the reprobate. The Catholic Church doesn't teach that. It might seem like it's the same thing, but the Catholic Church doesn't teach that. The Catholic Church teaches that God chose the elect and didn't choose the reprobate. That's the difference. And why that's important, I know some people might think it's a distinction without a difference. But
it puts a third class, because you have non-reprobates who are non-elects as well, right? So somebody like me might not be an elect, but I might not be a reprobate either.
Where would you go?
That's what I want to know.
I don't know about a third group. Either you're in the club or you're not. Either you go to heaven.
So there's just the elect and the not elect. There's just those two groups.
I can't think of what the third group would consist of.
Okay, because I was wondering if reprobate was like, I don't know, a specific kind of like, maybe reprobates are these people who are destined to go to hell, and then elects are destined to go to heaven. But then maybe there's like a third group in the middle. Okay, I'm glad there isn't a third group in the middle. There's just two groups.
There's only heaven or hell. There's only heaven or hell in Catholic theology. Now, there is such a place called purgatory, but that's for the elect too.
Right.
The elect go to purgatory. It's kind of like wiping your feet before you go to heaven or grandma's house or something like that. So it's heaven. Same thing with Calvinism. I in my interactions with Calvinism, I don't recall ever a third group that's discussed.
Okay.
It's either you're the elect or you're not.
All right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what exactly is the distinction between the Calvinist and the Catholic position as in terms of there being an elect and not elect? Is it, I mean, if they both believe that there's an elect and that the elect are predestined, I don't really see the distinction from my perspective.
Oh, okay. So, well, the distinction is more powerful when you think about why it matters in terms of the punishment of hell. Because in Calvinism, then God is the author of both, good and evil, because the reprobate will do bad things and the good will do righteous things. Sometimes they do bad things, and sometimes the reprobate do some good things. But the cause of, or the reason for their reprobation is God. God chose their reprobation, and that the reason why they go to hell is God's choice. And that this is where the free will doctrine fits in to the Catholic theology, because it seems similar, but that's where the free will really fits in, because God has chosen the elect, and they're going to infallibly go to heaven. The reprobate, the reason why they go to hell is not because God chose them to go to hell. It's because, I mean, let's take a step back. Nobody deserves heaven. You start off with that assumption from any Christian, well, most Christians, I would say, traditional Christians. They'll admit nobody deserves heaven.
Right.
Because of original sin or whatever it is, because we can't obligate God. He can do whatever he wants. That's what the nature. I mean, that's why God is God. He can do whatever he wants. So none of us deserve salvation or going to heaven or whatever. And so the fact that he chose some for salvation is a grace, and it's a grace that they benefit from. Now, he didn't choose the reprobate, and the reprobate, when they do go to hell, the reason for their and the reason why it's just and fair, I guess you can say, is because the sins that they did in their lives are of their own doing, because they followed their nature, their sinful nature, and so they go to hell not because God caused them to go to hell,
right,
but their decisions caused them to go to hell. And that's.
But did they decide to have a sinful nature?
No, they didn't.
Okay, so they acted in accordance with a sinful nature that God gave them, and
Sure.
God is going to punish them because they acted in accordance with it.
They follow their nature, and it's sin. It's
right.
They chose to do the sin.
Okay, but it's just that, like, if you're agreeing with me that God gave them a sinful nature, do we agree on that? Because it just seems like if they don't have a choice, and God the omnipotent could have simply made them not have a sinful nature.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if God gives a sinful nature, and then people act in accordance with it, it seems, first of all, like they don't have free will, because if you were to have free will, or I guess not by your definition, I guess maybe that would be the point of contention. It just seems to me like free will, you would have the ability to not act influenced and I guess sort of determined by a sinful nature. But from your perspective, it seems to be the case that, yeah, you have a sinful nature. You can't not have that sinful nature, and acting in accordance with it, it damns you to hell. Is that?
Yeah, this is the reason why, when we were discussing to have this discussion, that I said I don't want to have a debate.
Right.
And the reason why is because we don't agree that God exists.
Right. There's not a lot of debates, oddly enough, do have to start with some agreement.
No, well, the reason why I'm saying that is because for me to unpack your question, and there's an answer to your question, you already have to understand Christianity, the Bible, the teachings of the Catholic Church, the philosophy embedded within the methodologies of the Catholic theological system, for you to understand the answer. So I could give you an answer, and your audience and yourself would say, it sounds like bullshit. And I would agree with you. It would sound like bullshit, because you're not part of the club, because you don't quite understand. You wouldn't understand. So let me give you a little teaser. So within Catholic theology, freedom is probably defined in a way that you wouldn't agree with. It's just not what normal folks on the street would agree with freedom. When you think about freedom, I could do this, I could do this, I could shut this thing off and just go get some dinner. Like, I could say, I don't have to continue doing this interview, right? I have, whatever, I could do what I want to do. Well, that's not quite how freedom is defined in Catholic theology. Freedom is the ability to do good. It's the freedom to do good. So freedom is the capacity to be able to do good. So before one is touched by grace, according to Catholic theology, one is enslaved to sin. And Protestants probably share in some of this language. So probably a Calvinist would say the same. So they'll say, I think Calvin, not just Calvin, but Martin Luther had a doctrine of the bondage of the will. So I think that's what he wrote. One of his books was called The Bondage of the Will. And so you're enslaved to sin until your life is touched by a certain kind of grace, a grace that transforms your life. and that kind of grace. And now you're you'd have to understand the different degrees of grace and the different kinds of grace. But suffice it to say, it's a certain kind of grace. It's different from other kinds of grace that transforms your life, and now you're on the path towards righteousness and salvation and all this other stuff. So once your life is touched by grace, then you're now able to choose the good. And that's what freedom is the ability to choose the good, not the ability to choose good or evil. Does that make sense? Well,
Yeah,
it might not make sense, but that's how we define it.
Yeah, no, you were correct in your assessment that that we would disagree on what freedom is, but no, like kind of trying to best as I can wear your worldview to address what it is you're saying. I guess that makes sense. It just seems, I guess, the only problem that I have, and this isn't something that's actually a problem philosophically speaking with your theology by any means, so I hope to not present it as though it is. I guess it just seems to be the case that, like, if I am going to go to hell, like if right now it is the case that I as a being am going to go to hell, that there isn't really anything I could do to change that. And it seems like if that's the case, then, you know, reasons for like potentially becoming theist, and I know you're not here trying to convert me, so I don't want to try to imply that I think you are, but it seems like reasons for, you know, accepting Christianity, accepting Catholicism kind of go out the window if I already think that I'm going to go to hell, don't they? I mean, if you're wearing like my worldview to address that perspective.
No. This is a head scratcher for there's probably do you usually have Protestants on your interview? Have you ever had a Catholic interviewed?
I haven't had a Catholic interviewed. Actually, the only Christian that I've had on was my friend Eddie Kroom, and I don't think he would identify as a Protestant. I don't know that he wouldn't, so I don't want to assert that he wouldn't. But Eddie isn't really an apologist. He's just a Christian who's a really bright philosopher. So
okay,
yeah,
okay. So how do I answer that question? Well, you're right. I'm not trying to convert you. And in my view, in the Catholic view, I would say the Catholic view, is that, I mean, going back to what I already said earlier, those who are predestined are predestined. So let's say, and it might be the case, and good for you if it is the case, you might be predestined. If my worldview is correct, you might very well be predestined. I don't know. I don't know when your time. You might live into your ripe old age of 99.9 whatever years,
right?
Or maybe beyond that. And then on your deathbed, you're like, you know what? I don't know. Whatever. You make the choice and you say, God, I accept you, or whatever.
Oh man, that teleological argument was onto something. Yeah,
maybe because that happens. Look at Anthony Flew. Yeah. Anthony Flew, atheist for decades. I don't know if he was born. I mean, he was an atheist since he was young, but. He was one of the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, whatever it was called, that they called themselves. Mm-hmm. And then, in his later years, he became a theist. And of course, the other, Sam Harris and whoever the other ones are, Dawkins, they're like, well, he lost his marbles. He's clearly, and whatever, that whether that's the case or not. All I'm saying is he switched over.
Yeah.
And I might in the end. At the end of the day, I might not be elect, and I'm reprobate. Right. So we might see ourselves switched.
Yeah, no, it's kind of possible that I might die a Catholic and you might die an atheist. We can't really rule that out.
You can't rule that out. So I don't make any assumptions, is what I'm saying. So I don't know what will convince you. So I can answer your question using my understanding of Catholic theology, which is. There's a kind of grace called prevenient grace. It's preveniens, the Latin phrase, meaning pre-coming. Let's get our heads out of the gutter. Pre-coming, for those who are. What that means is before you come to Christ, there is this preparation grace. That's a better way of understanding it. Preveniens grace, and that's the grace that draws.
I'm mature, I swear.
Someone that draws someone like Anthony Flew out of his whatever his dark or whatever we would say darkness. I don't mean that as an offense, but out of the cloud that was before him that prevented him from accepting truth.
Yeah.
And I use quotes not because I don't believe it, but because we don't agree. So I'll just say truth, my truth.
Yeah.
And that's what prepares him, and then he finally accepts God. And I think in his book he didn't quite accept the Christian God. He just accepted God, one of his final books. And so whether or not that was sufficient for him to be saved, I don't know. I'm not his judge. I'm not God. So that's what would happen for an individual that ultimately is elect, is at some point in their life, it's all been determined, is again, back to my original point. It's all been determined. So whether you believe in predestination or not, or determinism or not, your experience of the world. So if I were talking to an atheist and I say, look, because you have atheists that believe in free will, truly, and you have atheists that don't. I
debated one. So, yeah.
But if you think about it, we're debating like abstract concepts. In neither side of that debate would you disagree that the world would act any differently. Does that make sense what I'm saying? The world is still going to act the way it is.
Right.
What we're arguing about is why it is acting the way it is.
Right. I tend to give the example of, I talk about, water that has evaporated that is going to fall later as rain. Like, even though it hasn't happened yet, it hasn't rained yet, it is already the case that it's going to rain because the cause of it is actually already in place. And the same way, what you're going to say in response to this sentence, for example, that causation is already taking place in your brain, and that effect is going to happen the same way. It's already determined, and it can't really be changed. It feels like it, but that's, I guess, an interesting perspective. And you are right. It is probably for the better that we didn't schedule a debate, that we decided to do a dialogue instead. For those who don't know, we met through our my good friend, mutual friend, I believe, Robert Stanley, who hosts the Right to Reason podcast. So shout outs to him. I was looking for a debate, and Laurence didn't want no smoke. So we decided we were going to have a dialogue instead. But no, having done a couple of debates, and now that I've added this dialogue series to my channel, I've actually come to find that I think I'd like dialogues a bit more, because debates give people this incentive to have this kind of like point scoring thing. And I'm not a dishonest interlocutor, but so I wouldn't do this. But a lot of people earlier, when you said you agreed with me, would have been like, we're done. I win. When you're like, oh, well, I agree with what you just said. They're like, boom, done. And then the video title would be something like, brilliant atheist educates Catholic professor moron, or something horrible like that.
Atheist spanks Catholic.
Yeah, destroys something like that. Yeah. But fine. In the dialogue, we're given a better opportunity, because neither of us were expecting to change the other one's mind here today. I think both of us did want to help the other one have a better understanding of where the other one was coming from. And that's the main reason I put these discussions out there, that I do these discussions, is I want people to have a better understanding of, what is it that Calvinists think, and what is it that Catholics think in respect to free will? Because I don't just want to tell people what I think Calvinists and Catholics think, because then it could become a misrepresentation, while not deliberately. If you misunderstand somebody's position, you might misrepresent them. And so I'm glad that I was able to present my audience with your views on freedom. And I think it almost seems like, if I defined freedom the same way that you did, then I would say, sure, freedom exists. You could have free will even in a predetermined, predestined, or whatever kind of reality. And if you were to agree with my definition, does it seem like we would agree on the assessment that you can't have free will in a deterministic universe?
Yeah, probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I shared with Robert Stanley, his last name is blanking on me, but I believe in free will as a point of doctrine. So there he is.
Yeah.
As a point of doctrine, right? And because I'm a committed Catholic, I accept everything the Catholic Church teaches. Now, I'm going to have the critics that say, "Well, you're just a puppet," and so fine. I don't care if that's what you want to call me, but that's
Right.
when you're committed to a worldview. It's all or nothing. That's just what it is. If you're a Christian
Okay.
and you believe the Bible is the Word of God, it's all or nothing. If you're that kind of like a Protestant Christian, if you're Catholic, you accept everything that the Catholic Church teaches in regards to Scripture, tradition, and all that other stuff that it claims to have the authority of. It's all or nothing. Now, if there was a point where I was like, that's irreconcilable with some other thing that I hold to, I'm at an impasse, and I would have to make a decision to leave. Right. And so that's the only reason why.
Yeah, because I was like, my understanding, and I'm glad that I was able to talk to you and kind of fix my understanding of your position, but my understanding of your position prior to this discussion was that you've thought about free will, and from your own logic and your own reason, you're like, no, there can't be any free will. But like the Catholic Church says there is, so I'm just going to go with that. And I'm glad that it seems like that's not exactly what you're doing. What you're saying is you accept a worldview. The worldview entails the entirety of it being true. So when you find something that appears to be inconsistent, what you reason out is that you most likely don't understand something, or it seems to be inconsistent, and you want to re-examine it and make sense of it later. But since you accept the Catholic doctrine, if you find out something is a part of Catholic doctrine, even if it doesn't make sense, well, you might try to investigate and better understand it. You would, since you assume the Catholic doctrine to be true, you would assume that part of it to be true as well, right?
Yeah, but here's the interesting thing. I'm trying to work out what you describe. I mean, the study that you quoted in your previous debates and what we kind of alluded to here, I'm trying to reconcile that with what I already said about Catholic theology, because I think those are reconcilable. So kind of to not to correct necessarily, maybe I misunderstood. Apart from faith, let me make this clear. Apart from my faith, what makes sense to me is there is no free will. If I were to reject my faith and I went back to atheism, the thing that makes the most sense to me, because all my data is simply like psychological data or maybe philosophical data or whatever it is, and I have to make a choice if it's an important enough issue for me. And it seems like the evidence is on the side of no free will, right? But I'm a committed Catholic, so I add to that, and I have to try to fix. Not to say I have my Catholic brain and I have my non-Catholic brain, and all contradictions.
You're able to wear a different worldview, kind of like goggles, to address certain things.
Well, not even just that, but I think even the same issue. Can I reconcile my Catholic goggle side with the other side that I am inclined to accept? So is it possible, like, not to say that this is Catholic teaching, this is my own way of trying to reconcile this, and a Catholic can do this as long as you don't reject or go against a dogmatically defined Catholic teaching. So the Catholic teachings are two things. Predestination is true. Free will is true. That's it. That's all it says. How those two things reconcile and work together is the work of theology, and then been debating about this for 5-6 centuries, so even longer. So what I'm trying to say is, I think that evidence from psychology today that you alluded to, that we alluded to, can be reconciled with what I already said about grace. Because is it possible that the kind of grace I was talking about is that movement in the brain that makes the choice, and then you play it out in your conscious awareness? Maybe I have to explore that. I haven't written about it too much, but that's kind of what I've been playing around with for a few years. It's almost like I don't know if you're a video gamer. I don't know. I don't want to make
not particularly,
but I have this certain image about video gamers, what they look like, so I don't even know. But the consciousness is outside of the game. The one making decisions is outside of the game, but the character is the one in the game, right? Okay. So if you get hit by a paralyzing dart, for example, in the game, well, that doesn't mean my mind is impaired. The character
Yeah.
is. So I try my best to maneuver in whatever it is with the limits of my character's body, but the controller is me. It's me in the real
Right.
world.
And to
And-
help strawman your position, you're not saying God is necessarily that controller of you as a conscious being, but rather that your consciousness controls your physical body. And your physical body would be the analogous to the game, and your consciousness would be analogous to the controller of the game.
It could be.
Okay.
I haven't, like I said, I haven't ironed all this stuff out yet.
Okay.
And maybe I'll write something about it. And who knows? I might go in the history books of Catholicism. I don't know, but that might be a possible thing. But that's what theologians try to do. They try to make sense of what we already know and make sense of and reconcile it with our own experience, right? In the real world. So, otherwise, you have to make a decision. You either reject one or the other. Now, I know there's some recent articles questioning the validity of that original study. So, I mean, as you would probably agree, things or even conclusions in science are always, to some degree, still tentative.
Right.
In the sense that it might seem that's the answer, but was there a flaw in the study? What was there? Is it possible that there was an error in the measurement, in the measuring?
Right. Yeah, because science, it adjusts its views based on observations, and as time goes by, more observations get made, so science becomes more accurate as time goes by. But that isn't to say that science is perfect. Science is more of like our way of describing reality or coming to understand reality. And while we can have philosophy is like the root of science. So while we can have sort of ways to make conclusions, it could always be the case that there's some missing variable. So that's why, like a case study in psychology isn't completely useless, but it isn't like the most conclusive kind of evidence-based thing you could have, right?
Sure.
So there are methods we're able to get more accurate as we go. And I agree with what you said. Like science does, every conclusion made by science is, generally speaking, it's open to interpretation. The difference is once it's been tested, replicated, and verified, I feel like that changes whether or not it's questionable. Like in my opinion, if you can test, replicate, verify, not only that it works, because as we both know, correlation isn't evidence of causation, but you actually also have the explanation of how it works. So not just the fact that every time I drink coffee, I feel more, energized or whatever, but we also have like the neurological explanation of like why that's the case. Then we're able to say like it is conclusive that caffeine has the effect that it has. And you could say that effect kind of varies from people, but you get my point, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, I'm glad we had a dialogue rather than a debate, particularly because we didn't really have enough disagreement for a debate, it seems like. But I think that we had a pretty enlightening discussion. I think it was fruitful for people listening, whatever side they fall on. If you have a channel and you would like to re-upload this on your own channel, you have my permission to do so. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up from here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And Laurence, thank you so much again for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.
You too.